Okay, looking at back when I was growing up in Massachusetts, and those, you think of the race issue in particular. The race issue today is a lot different than it was back when I was in my hometown, and I'm more aware today of race differences than I was back as a kid. And I'll tell you why. It's in my hometown, 1,200 people, 100% white. When I moved to Westfield, Massachusetts, 35, 40,000 people, one high school, graduating class of 200 people. Never had a black person in school. Never saw one.
Was there any racism among the whites? Between Irish, English, Italian, Germans?
Mostly what you heard back then was Jewish, and for some reason, like your local school bullies would pick on the Jewish people. One of my best friends was a Jewish. His dad was my family doctor, and Johnny was one of my best friends. And that poor guy in school, he would be picked on for being Jewish, and nicest kid you can meet. And he would he it hurt him pretty bad. I've talked to him recently, like about 3 years ago. He says, "Man," "I got hurt so bad." He said, "One guy, he remembers his dad named Stephen." He said, "Then Russell," he said, "he ought to be one of the big bullies." He said he was always, picking on me because I was Jewish. He said, and he'd make some pretty bad remarks, and he'd beat me up all the time. I said, "Well, Johnny, how did you handle it?" He said, "Well, I fixed it one day." He says, I got when I go home from school," he said, "I beat this big old tree. I walked by the big old trees. He said, "Stephen would always he would follow me home, and he'd know I was going to be going by these trees, and he'd gonna pick on me." And so what he did one day, he said he hid behind a tree himself. Johnny did. When he's walking past the tree, he stepped in behind, and he had a baseball bat with him, small baseball, like a kid's baseball bat. He said, "Stephen, come looking for him." He said, "Johnny he hopped up behind the tree and smacked him across the knee with a baseball bat and ran home." He said, "Next day I figured he was going to take and kill me." He said, "Never saw the guy again, ever followed me again." He said, "He learned his lesson." He said, "But I was scared." He said, "I figured if I hit him so hard that I thought I broke his knees." He said, "But," he said, "taught the guy a lesson." But that's sort of race. But, like, I don't recall, I can't recall ever seeing a black person when I was growing up until I was well into my high school years. And the only black people I would see was if I went to visit my cousins in Springfield, which was 150,000 people in Springfield. They had black people there. You might go to that neighborhood and you see somebody walking by the house once in a while. But you never saw blacks. But you'd hear about it. Like the different cities had these riots and so forth. But back in the 40s and the 50s, in the early 50s, I never knew a black person. In the 60s, after I got married my first time, uh, that's when I think a lot of Detroit riots and things like that took place. And then you became aware of the race riots. And your races down south in Selma, Alabama, and places like that took place in the 60s. And those are bad. I mean, it made you well aware of what's going on. And But I never had a problem with race myself until 1968. And that was a situation where I was caught in a situation that none of my doing. As in Guam at the time, and I was working on a base, on the Air Force base, and we used to go off base once in a while. We'd go to a place in town. Is it the capital? The capital of Guam was Agana, and at one bar, that would be a place where the GIs would go, and the civilian workers. There's only 18 of us civilian workers on the base, so Saturday night you might go out for a beer or two. And a lot of the Air Force guys would go there, and there was a Navy base down in the southern part of Guam that the Navy guys would come to the same, but the place is called a half a day lounge. Half a day means like Hawaiian, aloha. Half a day in Guamanian is aloha in Hawaiian. And went there one night, and this was the night after um, Martin Luther King got killed. And that place is jam packed full of people, whites and blacks, okay. And the guy we drove with, just four of us drove down there, and for some reason the guy who owned the car, he left early and left us there. He said, "You guys can catch the bus back." The bus at midnight. Well, we got midnight and the bus already gone. So we're going to try and call a taxi, but there's no taxis either. I mean, the taxi's not like a yellow cab. A taxi would be a local Guamanian just making, drive around you when he needed a ride. You flag him down, he would just wave that he's a taxi driver. But anyways, we come out of the bar, and they close at midnight, and I looked around, and there was just me and my two buddies, both white, three white guys, and a parking lot full of black people. And we didn't give it a thought. And we started walking out towards the road and through the parking lot. And we're going to just go out onto the highway and walk towards the base. And if a car on by a taxi, we'd stop it. Well, we got about halfway across the parking lot to the road. And this car comes screaming by, and he slams the brakes on. And there's four white guys, four sailors in it. They jump out of the car and start throwing rocks into the crowd, jumped back in the car and took off. I mean, and they're hollering, black epithets. It scared the hell out of me. I said, my God. Look, strip a hornet's nest, right? Here's Martin Luther King just got shot, and these guys are going to strip a race riot. And these black guys were all Air Force guys and Navy guys, right? We started walking. I told the guys, just walk real slow, like and walk along the highway and see what happens. Well, there's about 8 of them following us. And I figured, man, something's going to happen here. We each had a bottle of beer in our hand. I said, well, hang on to that bottle. You might need it. If you'll get hurt, might as well hurt somebody back. But it looked pretty bad, And we walked about a mile. And there's a little side road come out, and we got, maybe like 50 feet from the side road, and there comes a car down the side road. And the guy, the window rolled down, and it's a Guamanian, he's waving his hand. We ran up there, jumped in the car, says, take off right now. And man, here comes the black guy running after us. I mean, running and throwing bottles at us and shit. Bounced up the car, and the guy peeled out. And was the taxi driver, lucky for us. I don't know what would have happened if the guy, But that's my only instance of ever having and nothing we could have done that would change that, but very fortunate. But then, getting back in a race, you think about my kids and your kids, what they're facing, I mean, think about the ethnic part of it first, here's my first wife, Barbara, the mother of Stephen, Pete, Kimberly, and David. Barbara is, I believe her parents were French on both sides. Her mother's a DuPont, and her dad was a cook, but he was from Montreal, Canada area. So pretty much the boys, like my kids, Kimberly and Steve, Pete, and David, their mother is French Canadian ancestry. Okay. Of course, mine are all English and Irish, so it's kind of crazy when you think about it. I mean, the infiltration in this country of different ethnic groups. Now you're getting the Spanish in this, well, actually nationwide, but here in the Southwest, you're getting a lot of Spanish. And I find it kind of humorous to think of me. My father hated blacks, and he hated Mexicans to a passion. I can look at you talk about radio back in those days. Our big thing on living in Russell, Massachusetts during the war. Radio would come on, and that's all I had was radio. You didn't have TV. And on Sunday nights, it was common to sit down in the house and listen to radio programs, Amos and Andy, Jack Benny, different shows like that. Red Skelton. And they were humorous to me, half-hour shows and very few commercials. We used to sit there and laugh and laugh. And one show, I think it was a Jack Benny show, had a Mexican guy would come on every skit. I mean, for a half-hour program, and he'd come on maybe for like 3 or 4 minutes. I remember he'd come on and he'd say, "Pardon me for talking in your face, senor." And my father heard that, and he'd turn the radio off. He'd not turn it off, he'd turn the volume down so he couldn't hear it. He did not want to hear that Mexican talking. And he'd wait a minute, turn the volume up a little bit, and he'd hear the guy talking, he'd turn it back off, you know. And when the guy finally stopped talking, he'd turn the show back on, you can listen to the rest of the show. If he knew I married a Mexican woman, whew, man. And my mother, when I told her I was going to marry your mom, you know, she said, "Well, I don't care. I mean, who you marry?" I said, "Well, I'm just letting you know. I married a lady, and she's a nice girl." I said, "She's a Mexican." And she said, she made a remark about, "I wouldn't care if she was black." I said, "Mom, that's not the way to look at this." You know? But looking at this, and here you're half Mexican. Your dad was gringo like me, and your mom was full Mexican. You think about this, and Sarah made this point. Very good point to make. Is all mamas, all your Irene's previous kids were, you know, you and Stephanie and Amy are all half Mexican. And Sarah is half Mexican. Sarah's married to a full-blooded Mexican. Her kids will be more Mexican than she is. I thought it was kind of crazy. I never thought about that before. But they're gonna be, yeah. But and I going to the movies back then, you know, back in Russell, Massachusetts, you go on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon. You hitchhike 8 miles to the city. And the city had 2 theaters, and there'd be 2 movies, and there'd be newsreels, and there'd be cartoons in between, and the previews. I mean, for 25 cents, you know. And you pay 5 cents for a box of popcorn, refill it 15 times if you want, you know.